decent amount of folks in the crowd, so let's kick off this party. Well, you're all here. This is going to be a presentation on the fundamentals of government, the first of a 5-part series. We go to the next slide, please, Lisa.
Yes, let me see. Oh, my apologies, my screen. There we are.
There we go. All right. Thanks again for joining us today, everybody. Just a few housekeeping notes. Like all PBA webinars, this is going to be recorded and it will be available on pba.org. Closed captioning, we are working on. Lisa, do you want to put that link?
Yes, so I did get a message. It looks like our closed captioning should be working now.
Okay, perfect. So for those of you that need closed captioning, at the bottom of the meeting control bar, there's a little CC button. If you click that, closed captioning will pop up for you. If you have any questions, please type it into the Q&A box. Otherwise, we will have a Q&A session at the end of the program. Next slide. All right, for some introductions. For those of you that don't know me, hello. My name is Julie Howell, and I'm an Associate Legislative Director here in the DC office. I'm a 5-year Army veteran, and I've been with PBA for about 1.5 years now. And then for Lisa.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Elijah. I am the new Grassroots Advocacy Manager here at PBA. I'm an Air Force veteran, and I also happen to be a PBA member since 2018. I'm excited that we have the opportunity to present this webinar series to you all. And I'll throw it back over to Julie.
Thanks. So a quick series overview. We're calling this the 5 W's and an H. So the who, what, where, why, when, and how of advocacy. The whole point of this series is to get everyone to like a baseline understanding of how this all works. It's been a really long time since most of us took a civics course. So this is just sort of intended to be a basic refresher. Since my time here, we've seen an increased interest in folks wanting to participate in seminar. A lot of folks are really eager to get involved with some Zoom meetings with their local offices or on the Hill. And, as the national office, we do this every day. So we're kind of at an advantage. And so Lisa and I and the government relations team really just wanted to be able to, provide some context and some more information to all of you, just to make you a little bit more comfortable in, what all of this is, so you all feel a little bit more prepared. So again, today's session is the fundamentals of government. Our second session is going to be the legislative process. So discussing, how does an idea become a bill, and then how does that bill become law? Our third session will be understanding the issues and becoming an agent for change. 4 will be who is advocating and who do we have those discussions with? And we'll wrap up with a session on the art of advocacy. Again, all in all, these sessions are intended to build upon one another and really just get everybody to a point where they feel super solid having these conversations with their elected officials and their staffs. Again, just to get everybody up to snuff and so that everybody feels more comfortable and confident doing this. Next slide. Okay. I'm going to take a few minutes to cover what the session is and what it is not. Things are politically tense in this country, but varying opinions are integral to compromise and finding solutions. We all understand that and we all respect that. So this course is not politically motivated. This is just the basics. What this is not, it is not a comprehensive civics course. We do not have the time to do that. This will also not be a space to debate politics or personal beliefs, and this is not going to turn into a forum for debate. This is Lisa and I trying to provide some more information for those of you that might be curious about it. Again, this is going to be an overview of the structures of government, a refresher course for those who may want or need it, and to be completely free of judgment. Again, it's been a long time. We all need reminders. So just think of this as like a 30,000-foot view of our current system. And again, hopefully you guys will get some information out of this that proves helpful to everybody. So the next slide, please. So why should you know about the government? It seems kind of obvious, but let's dig into that a little bit. Different level of government have different responsibilities. Thomas Jefferson said that a democratic society depends on an informed and educated citizenry. We should know about our government so that we know how to meet the needs of the people that are charged with representing us. Knowing the basics about your government helps bolster your advocacy, and understanding the process of all of this helps you know what to ask and who to ask it of. So, a couple examples, you know, take the ADA, for example. You all know that this is a federal law that protects people with disabilities from discrimination. All states have to adhere to the ADA, but some states might go a little bit further than the federal law requires. We've got veteran benefits listed here. Some states offer free property taxes to veterans that are 100% service connected, but not all states do that. That's up to state legislatures. And then something like veteran parking at your county building. That's something that is generally left up to your local governments, such as your city councils. There's different levels of government, and understanding their role is critical in finding solutions. When you see a particular issue, you have to assess, is that, my city council? Is that my state legislature? Is that the federal government? So this webinar is just intended to sort of break that down just a little bit to help answer some questions. And now I'm going to pass it over to Lisa.
All right, this is the first in a 5-part series. This webinar is on the fundamentals of government. Today we'll cover an overview of the federal government and its makeup, the 3 branches of government and what they entail, and a bird's eye view of state and local government. We tend to deal a lot with federal government at the national level, and this is the main lens in which we'll be viewing the topics covered today. The federal government is comprised of 3 branches, much of the same as at the state level. These branches are the legislative branch, where laws come from, along with other responsibilities we will cover, our judicial branch, where laws are interpreted, and the executive branch, where laws are enforced. Per the US Constitution, like I said before, there are 3 branches of government. There's the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch. This slide is a great physical representation of each branch and how to remember them by important physical locations each of them house. The US Capitol for the legislative branch, the White House for the executive branch, and the Supreme Court for the judicial branch. Under the legislative branch of the federal government, you have Congress. Congress is bicameral body, which means that it has 2 branches or chambers. These 2 chambers are the House of Representatives and the Senate. The legislative branch also houses other legislative branch partners, such as the Library of Congress. We'll cover an extensive list of the partners a little later in the webinar. Under the executive branch, you have the Office of the President and the Vice President, their advisors, and various departments and agencies. An example of these is the FBI or the Department of Veteran Affairs. Under the judicial branch, you have the US Supreme Court, the highest court in the US, which oversees federal and state courts. So the legislative branch was established by Article 1 of the Constitution. It was the first branch to be established by Congress, which tells us the amount of importance the founders placed in this branch. Section 1 reads, all legislative powers herein grant shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. They have the sole authority to enact legislation and declare war, and the right to confirm or reject presidential appointments and substantial investigative powers. Congress is bicameral, which encompasses the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. To pass legislation and get it signed into law, both the House and the Senate must pass the same bill by majority vote. And what that means essentially is that more than half the votes need to be in favor. The president can veto the bill, but Congress can override this veto by passing the bill again in each chamber with at least 2/3 the votes in each body voting in favor of the bill. As mentioned earlier, the legislative branch also houses the legislative branch partners. A very important partner that you should remember is the Congressional Budget Office. This office provides budget and economic information to Congress on the cost associated with enacting legislation. This is an important partner to remember when you're going into your congressional offices to advocate on issues and bills. Often the office will ask you if you know the CBO score of a bill. It's the cost estimate of what a bill would incur if it were passed. There have been times where the estimates are off based on unaccounted for mitigations, and this is why it's quite important for you to research when advocating for bills, because what the CBO score may be much higher than what it actually would cost. Another important partner to remember is the Government Accountability Office. They provide fact-based, nonpartisan information to Congress. They are often called the Congressional Watchdog. They provide auditing, evaluative, and investigative services to Congress, and they're charged with supporting Congress to meet its constitutional responsibilities and to help improve the performance and ensure the accountability of the federal government for the benefit of the American people. They are, in essence, the Inspector General of Congress. Included in this list is also a list of other partners for the legislative branch, such as the Library of Congress, National Archives, US Capitol Police, ones that you can look into a little bit more on your own time. And I'll pass it back over to Julie to go more in depth into the House and the Senate.
Thanks, Lisa. Sorry, everyone. I seem to be having some technical difficulties where I can't turn my camera back on, so you're just going to get my voice. So the House of Representatives, as a quick reminder, there are 435 elected members in the House of Representatives, each representing a different district, and they are all distributed among all 50 states. The district lines are drawn based on population data from the US Census. This is how come we see redistricting every 10 years. Those maps align with updated census data. A member of the House serves 2-year terms. This means that every 2 years, every member of the House is up for re-election. That's how come you get so many mailers all the time. It never ends. I must add, though, there are 6 non-voting members in the House. They include Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, American Samoa, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Northern Mariana Islands. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard the phrase, the power of the purse. Well, that's the House of Representatives. They have the power to initiate revenue bills, and if it impacts revenue for the United States, that bill has to start in the House. The House also has the authority to impeach federal officials, and the floor process usually has a pretty limited time for debate, so issues can tend to move pretty quickly once they hit the House floor. A little fun fact, the House also gets to elect the president in the event of an electoral college tie. The head of the House of Representatives is known as the Speaker, who is elected by the other representatives, and they are third in line to the succession of the president. To be a member of the House, you must be at least 25 years old. You have to have been a US citizen for at least 7 years, and you have to be a resident of the state which your district is in, but you don't necessarily have to be a resident of the district that you're choosing to represent. Next slide, please. So for the Senate, as you all probably know, there's 100 senators in the Senate, 2 from each state. Senators all serve a 6-year term, and the elections happen so that about 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years. The Senate has unlimited time for debate, which means things tend to move quite a bit slower over on the Senate floor. The Senate has the sole power to confirm presidential appointments and ratify treaties. The exception to this is that the House must also approve the appointment of a vice president should the vice president become the president and then pick their replacement. That replacement has to be confirmed by the House. And then they also have to chime in on any treaty that involves foreign trade. To be a US senator, you have to be at least 30 years old. You have to have been a US citizen for at least 9 years, and you have to be a resident in the state for which you choose to represent, which I think is kind of common sense. Next slide, please. For the executive branch, the executive branch is headed by the president, whose constitutional responsibilities include negotiating treaties, appointing federal judges, including the justices of the Supreme Court, appointing ambassadors and cabinet officials, acting as the head of state, and lastly, serving as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Also under the umbrella of the executive branch is the office of the vice president and the president's cabinet. Now, you've probably all heard about the cabinet. That's an advisory body made up of the 15 heads of the executive departments. So departments like the Department of Defense, Department of Veteran Affairs, Department of Labor, etc. Each of those has a head that represents or that stands up for them in the presidential cabinet. So the president gets to choose his cabinet officials, but as mentioned earlier, each of them has to be confirmed by the Senate. Now, to run for the office of presidency, one must be a natural born citizen. So a citizen from birth. You have to be born here. And you got to be 35 years old. And you have to have been a resident of the country for at least 14 years, which means you could have lived abroad for a while, but as long as you've been a resident of the US for the 14 consecutive years before you run, you're good. The president is elected indirectly by the voters through the electoral college system for a 4-year term. Now, presidents are limited to 2 elected terms of office, which means 8 years total. So that's the president and the executive branch. And now I think I could pass it back to Lisa.
Judicial branch is a government that decides the constitutionality of federal law and resolves other disputes around federal law. The American court system is based off of the English common law system. When the founders were creating our court system, it was kind of a copy and paste from the system that they had in place. The Supreme Court of the United States, commonly referred to as SCOTUS, is the highest court in the land. It has the ultimate appellate jurisdiction over all federal court cases and state court cases that involve a point of US constitutional or federal law. It also has original jurisdiction, meaning a case that has not been seen in a lower court or on a narrow range of cases. And those things involve certain things such as foreign diplomats or state government. As you see, all other cases go through a network of court cases before they reach the Supreme Court. As few as 6 justices have been in the Supreme Court, but since 1869, there have been 9 Supreme Court justices. An interesting fact is that actually the Supreme Court gave themselves judicial review, which is part of checks and balances. Before this, the court had less power, but from the case of Marbury versus Madison, which is in 1803, this allowed for this power, which helped shape the balance of power. An important attribute of the makeup of our government is separation of powers. The founding fathers were afraid of the federal government having too much power over the people. To combat this, they gave each branch certain responsibilities so that the powers of one branch are not at conflict with the others, and it prevents a concentration of power. Separation of powers isn't new. In fact, we can see this in ancient Greece, the reference of separate functions of power, which they sometimes referred to as separate organs. The organs work together in the body of a government, which is why you sometimes hear it referred to as a body. To oversee the executive branch, Congress passes laws and creates executive agencies and the programs they administer. They can override presidential vetoes by a 2/3 vote, as we had mentioned earlier, in both chambers, and can impeach the president. They ratify treaties and confirm presidential appointments to the executive branch, as well as the courts. To oversee the judicial branch, Congress can impeach judges, create lower federal courts, and fix their jurisdictions, set the size of the Supreme Court, and determine judicial salaries. Within Congress, the Senate confirms judges, which we saw last year with the appointment of Justice Brown to the Supreme Court. In the executive branch, they oversee Congress. The president can recommend legislation to Congress, veto bills passed by Congress, and implement laws passed by Congress. To oversee the judicial branch, the president nominates federal judges and may enforce court orders. For the judicial branch, they oversee the executive branch by declaring presidential actions unconstitutional and can determine whether the executive branch is properly administering laws passed by Congress. They oversee the legislative branch by interpreting congressional statutes and declare acts of Congress unconstitutional. I'll pass it back over to Julie to cover state government.
All right. And then fun fact, there's our fun little state map that represents what most of those states are actually known for. So state government is modeled just like the federal, and we're just going to keep saying this. There's an executive, a legislative, and a judicial branch. Next slide, please. Lisa, I'm going to ask you to mute. Sorry. There was a comment about an echo, so we'll just sort that out. All right. At the state level, the executive branch is headed by the governor, who is directly elected by the people within that state. Other folks under the state executive branches are your lieutenant governor, the attorney general, and the secretary of state. A state level attorney general represents the state and its agencies before the state and federal courts. They handle criminal appeals and statewide criminal prosecutions. Sorry, everyone. There we go. Hey, my face. For the Secretary of State, they serve as the state's chief elections officer. So they implement electronic filing and internet disclosures for campaigns and lobbyists and for other financial information. Next slide, please. A state's legislative branch is made up of elected representatives who consider issues introduced by its members before a governor signs bills into law. So budgets, tax legislation, etc. For the state legislative branch, it includes a smaller chamber and a larger chamber, again, based off the federal government. So essentially, we can think of it as state level having a Senate and a House. And while a state Senate might be pretty obvious, in different states, they can have different titles for their lower chamber. So you can have a House of Representatives, a state assembly, House of Delegates, etc. For the state Senate, usually those folks serve a 4-year term. And for the lower chamber, it's usually a 2-year term. And again, we're just going to stress that a dual chamber legislature is considered bicameral. And it literally means 2 chambers. So when you hear us talk to you about a bill and we say that that bill is bicameral, that means it's already been introduced in the House and the Senate. Fun fact, there's only one state in the US that does not have a bicameral legislative body, and that is Nebraska. They only have 1 legislative body. Next slide. Go ahead, Lisa.
All right. At the state level for the judicial branch, state courts form the backbone of the American judicial system. Most state laws are at the state or local, most laws are state or local laws. And in most cases, civil and criminal cases are heard in state courts. Veteran treatment courts are also held at this level. Judges are put in place through judicial appointments and elections, and makeup the court is determined by legislation in the state constitution. Federal and state governments have power similar in a lot of ways to local government. But local government must be granted power by the state. There are usually 2 tiers of the state level: counties or boroughs, parishes, and municipalities or cities, towns. Municipalities can be structured in many ways as defined by the state constitution. They are generally organized around a population center, and in most cases correspond to the geographical destination used by the US Census. Municipalities generally take responsibility for parks and recreational services, police and fire departments, housing services, emergency medical services, municipal courts, transportation services, including public transportation, public works like snow removal, signage, and so forth. While federal government has the ability to make large changes through the whole country, local government allows for more direct access with faster path to change. This is why it's important to not only make relationships with federal level legislators, but those in your local community as well. I'll pass it back over to Julie for a quick review.
Okay, so things that we have covered. Federal and state governments are very similar in structure. And I'm going to say it one last time. Judicial, executive, legislative branches. Separation of power is critical for government success. Knowing the difference between federal and state governments is important, so you know who to talk to. And while they're similar, they have different powers and authorities, which again, we will get into in upcoming sessions. That was a lot of information, and that went really fast. So take a deep breath, let it out. Let us know if you have any questions. I think we have the Q&A slide next. That's session one. Again, just a very, very basic understanding of the government. And now take it away if you have any questions.
All right, so I wanted to pass it over to Heather Ainsley, who is our Associate Executive Director of Government Relations, to do the moderation portion of the Q&A section. We're happy to answer any questions you may have, or if we can get you to the right person to answer those questions. I wanted to reiterate, this is an overview of the makeup of the government, so certain aspects of the makeup may have been skimmed over.
Well, thanks, Lisa and Julie. This is Heather, and we do appreciate everybody coming on today to participate in this first section of this webinar series. So we had one question that gets into, I think, where do you go when there's an issue? So let's say you have my county service officer, doesn't have enough staff because they say there's not enough money. And you're trying to figure out, well, who do I talk to about that? How do I know where to go? Julie, is that one that you can maybe help us think through, kind of a problem that you see and then see the impact?
Sure. What a great question. So it gets really tricky because, your county veteran service officer, in essence, works for the VA, and the VA is part of the federal government. So it would stand to reason that you would go to the federal government for those solutions. However, if you are lucky enough to have a county veteran service officer, it's actually your county government that has set aside the funding to staff that office and make that commitment. So if, you think that having additional staff in your county veteran service office would be beneficial, pitch that to your city council, talk to your local elected officials, and they will, determine whether or not they have the resources to add additional staff to that office. Now, it does get a little tricky because additional funding can sometimes be approved at the federal level. So Congress has the ability to increase resources for the Department of Veteran Affairs, and the VA can make grant funding available for local county offices for their staff, but it's a supplemental grant that can help bolster the local resources that are offered. So that's an example of, while the main funding source is local, it can be bolstered by the federal government. And tons of situations exist like that, where there's going to be joint jurisdiction. But again, it's all just knowing who's going to have the answer to the question that you have to ask. Hopefully that was helpful.
Is there like an order you have to follow, like in that situation where you're like, gosh, there might be money available from the federal government, but then there's also the local connection. Do you have to go to one over the other, or can you just reach out to whoever you think might be best?
You should always start at the local level. The notion that all politics is local, most issues also start at a local level. And if you approach your local government and they say, well, we can't do this, then you keep raising up a tier. So similar to, complaint processes or something like that, you always start at the bottom rung of that ladder. And then if you don't find resolution, then you move up. It's sort of like, anything at a job. You always start with your direct supervisor. You never just go straight to the top. It's just like your chain of command in the military. You start with your section chief, then you go to your platoon sergeant, yada, yada, yada. Always try and solve the problem most directly at the local level. And if any of you have any questions about where to start when it comes to addressing an issue, reach out and, we can be hopefully helpful in sussing out who exactly you should reach out to, which is, again, one of the reasons that we wanted to have a series like this, and why we, PBA provides all the other webinars, is helping you guys figure out who you should talk to when you have an issue.
A little bit about the process of a bill and how it goes through the process. That cute little song and commercial many of us remember about how a bill becomes a law.
I didn't hear the first part of the question.
Process of how a bill becomes a law, and the saying that most of us have heard the cute little song where the bill is dancing, and tell us a little bit about what that process is like, and maybe what we covered here, but what you're going to cover later on.
Lisa, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So that's a great question. It's actually a really great segue into our next session. So that is essentially what we're going to be covering next session, is the legislative process, how a bill becomes a law. And we'll go much more in depth on that one. So if you want to stay tuned, our next session will be on May 30th, and we'll go much more in depth.
Q&A box. We've had a couple of questions on some specific issues, and we'll follow up with you offline about that, those particular issues, so that we can try to help you to resolve those. But if you have any specific questions about the information that we've presented here, that you want to try to think through a little bit more about our various levels and branches of government, please do put those in the Q&A box. One question we had was, how often will these sessions be held? So Julie or Lisa, can you maybe talk a little bit more about the overall webinar series and frequency and topics?
Yeah, absolutely. So the plan is to have them once a month. So the next session is on the 30th of May, and then we'll be having one in late June that we'll be announcing later on as well. But stay tuned, we'll have another flyer coming out very shortly for the next session.
That are going to be covered.
I'm sorry, Heather, you cut out there a little bit.
Covering.
My audio is still cutting out, but I think you'd asked what the overview of the topics of what we will be covering. Is that right? So the second one is going to be the legislative process. The third one is understanding the issues and becoming a change agent. It kind of covers more of the advocacy portion of it. The fourth is who is advocating and who with. So a lot of whether it be other advocates, staffers, nonprofit partners. And then to round it all out is the art of advocacy. We're kind of putting a nice tidy bow on the whole thing.
We also had, maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about what someone can do that maybe wants to know more about the issues that you talked about today. Are there resources available online, or other places you can go to learn more information?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what we are going to do is follow up with everyone who is registered. And a lot of the resources that we use to put this together, we will get that out to everybody. So you will have hyperlinks that will bring you to web pages that will answer, where did we get all this from? But for those that are interested, almost every government web page has a link to some kind of resource. Like, we are oversaturated with information in this time and age. A great resource is the House of Representatives and the US Senate. Both of those sites have resources that will go more into depth for what we've been discussing. And they will break out little sections to really just expand on the things that we just touched on today. We knew that this was going to be a lot of information and we didn't want to overload everybody. So I would highly encourage everyone to go to either the House of Representatives, the US Senate, go straight to the source, even the White House. There's a lot of resources put out by the federal government to answer everybody's questions. Most of those have really helpful videos that you can watch. Again, more resources. And then there's, I don't want to push the YouTube, but Schoolhouse Rocks, which is that little video that Heather was talking about, how a bill becomes a law. There's a lot of really great resources and crash courses through like PBS, NPR, which all have YouTube channels. They can do a much more comprehensive explanation of the things that we really only dabbled in.
And those will be shared out with everyone so that you can take a look at them and learn more about the process that we have. Any final, I believe that doesn't look like we have any more questions on this particular topic. Again, I am reaching out to folks that are asking about some other things. So Lisa, I'll turn it back over to you. I think you've got another slide for us. Lisa, you're muted.
Thank you. I think it wouldn't be a webinar if we didn't have one of those. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us in session 1 of our 5-part series. For participants that were unable to make it to the live session and are viewing our webinar as a recording, if you would like credit for this session, please feel free to email me the code 2A1FG@lisae@pba.org. Everyone who's in today's session has already been marked down for credit. Make sure to join us again next time on May 30th at 3 p.m. and we will be covering the legislative process. Thanks everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a great night.